After my last 3 big screen experiences with Alien Romulus, The Crow, and Blink Twice ended up being disappointments, finally, something that is more solid than not. I'm so happy. This review is probably going to be fairly short because there's not a lot I can talk about without giving away too much. And I would like you guys to go into this movie, should you choose to watch it, with as little knowledge of things as possible. Like I did. I only knew that this film starred Willa Fitzgerald and that it was about a serial killer. I was curious, obviously. So I went to check it out tonight, Sunday night, 7 something. And I've had time to sort of organize my thoughts a little bit. I took some notes, but some notes I'm not going to refer to because it is a bit too spoilery. The premise is it's about a serial killer. And there's this girl involved in the story. I did not watch the trailers. I don't know if the trailers reveal a bit too much. No clue. I'm going to just be as vague as I can. Some things that I really enjoyed about this film. There were a few things that got under my skin, which I will vaguely touch on later, but there were some interesting things about this film that I wrote down. One was that at the very beginning, it starts off with this sort of narrative that in a lot of ways reminded me of the intro narrative to or narration, whatever, to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It had that vibe. Though this film did not take place in the 70s, it takes place in around 2018, 2020. So what was interesting about the whole Texas Chainsaw type commentary at the beginning is that it leads you to believe this is a true story. Potentially. I briefly wondered whether it was, and then quickly figured out, no, it's probably not. And it also indicated before the film started that this was filmed entirely on 35mm, and it shows. It looks like, it's got that texture, it's got the film grain and everything, and it was really cool to see that. You don't really realize how much you could tell a difference between that and something shot digitally. And in a way, I feel like it kind of added character to this movie. The film, it indicates, hold on a moment.
I thought you were on a live stream.
I'm filming a review before the live
She's a
stream.
Linda Hamilton fan, by the way.
Oh, here we go.
She likes to fangirl over Terminator, Arnold, Linda Hamilton.
I think everybody knows this already.
Should I rotoscope your face and just put you on every Swiftie sort of thing?
All right, let me get back to this. What was I saying? Oh, okay. What I was getting ready to say is it also indicates that this film is told in 6 chapters. And interestingly enough, unlike what you might typically expect, it starts off, instead of with chapter 1, it starts off with chapter 3. So you get thrust into this action. There is this woman played by Willa Fitzgerald. She is running. Someone is pursuing her. And you're kind of caught up in the suspense of this. What in the world is going to happen? Each chapter, I don't know, is maybe, I was going to say 10 minutes or less, but I think some chapters lasted longer than others. So after chapter 3, and I wrote all of this down because I felt like it would be interesting to mention it. After chapter 3, and each chapter is kind of leaves you on a bit of a cliffhangery sort of thing. It then goes forward. This film jumps forward and backward in time. It goes forward to chapter 5. And when chapter 5 comes along, you start to notice other things that help put more puzzle pieces together. I will say that I kind of started to wonder about these sorts of things in the first chapter, but sort of let it go from my mind. And then chapter 5 happens and these things came back to the surface of my thoughts. Then after chapter 5, it jumps all the way back to the beginning. Oh, before it starts off with chapter 3, it does have a little teeny tiny clip from chapter 1, and it's very quick. I don't even know if it's a minute. And then it heads into chapter 3, chapter 5. Then it jumps backwards to chapter 1. And you get more stuff that's shown, obviously, and you start to have a bit of a pivot again with regard to what you're thinking about what's really happening, what's really going on here. After chapter 1, it jumps forward again to chapter 4. It sounds crazy. Honestly, it sounds weird, like, what are you doing? But it makes sense, you guys. Once the movie's done, it's like, wow, this is a perfect way to kind of pull you in and then pull you back out of the story and then kind of pull you back in again. And like, it's crazy. Not necessarily pull you out of the story, but just the gear shifting that goes on is interesting. After chapter 4, did I already mention it goes back in time? Okay, yeah, it goes back in time to chapter 2. Then it jumps all the way to the end where you see the climax of the film, basically. After that, there is one other sort of chapter, even though it's not titled a chapter. So this story is technically told in 7 parts because after chapter 6, we see an epilogue. We see the resolution of the story. And I really liked how they did that. I felt like it was a very unique way to tell this story, even though in a sense it's not necessarily all that unique, because we've seen movies where there's stuff that's happening and then we have flashback and then we go to the present and then another flashback and then back to the present. So it's nothing new, but for some reason it just felt really fresh to me. I liked how this film subverted what your expectation would be quite effectively. Maybe not necessarily as long as I thought that it was going to be, but it still did a really good job of making you ask yourself, how did this happen? Because you see something and yet you haven't seen the previous events that led up to this thing that you're seeing. So you're thinking to yourself, how did this occur? And then those questions are answered as you jump backwards to the chapter that shows all this stuff. There were a few things that got under my skin, and they were related to actions or lack of actions that some of the characters took. Obviously, these things needed to happen for purposes of moving the plot in the direction that it needed to go. But when held under some level of scrutiny, these things kind of made me roll my eyes, like characters not being as careful as they should have been given the situation, and characters doing things that would go against protocol because certain emotions were allowed to interfere that ended up allowing things to happen that should have never happened. I know this sounds super vague, but when you see the film, I'm thinking maybe you'll understand why I'm trying to be so vague. Despite these issues that I had, and they were very minor, I wrote down 3 or 4 things. In the grand scheme of everything, they're very minor, like I said. I got to the epilogue and I was thinking, I don't know if this film is going to feel as fulfilling or as satisfying as I was hoping, and that's going to be a real disappointment because I've already been disappointed 3 times in the past week plus. I still would have liked it more than the other 3 films, but it would have been downgraded a little bit in my mind. However, by the time the epilogue came around and I was starting to worry that I wasn't going to have the payoff that I wanted to happen, a payoff of sorts still happened. and I was really happy about that. The little tiny issues, while they didn't detract hugely from my enjoyment of the film, it was enough to kind of notch this down just a skosh from a 4-star, so I gave it a 3.75. But the other things about this film that I really enjoyed helped significantly mitigate those issues for me. Some of the stuff that I wrote down as huge pros about this film. Number one, the acting. I felt like Willa Fitzgerald did an amazing job in here. I first became aware of her or noticed her as an actor in the first season of Reacher. I really liked her character in there, and she did not disappoint in her performance here. She shows a huge range of acting ability, and I felt like her performance was the definite standout here. Other things I really liked about this were the cinematography. It was done in very interesting ways. Certain shots, the way they were framed was not necessarily something you've never seen before, but it's not something that you see often. And so when it happened, I really liked it. I thought that was great. Obviously, again, the fact that this was filmed on 35mm and it had a very unique texture to it and look and feel to it compared to most of the films we see today. Other things were the storytelling, which was fairly solid despite some of those issues, was still pretty solid. And the way the narrative, well, this ties in with storytelling, but the way everything was revealed to you little by little, unfolded as you were dragged forward and backward in time until the very end. I thought that was cleverly done, and it really bumped this film up for me from what might have ended up being a 3.25 or 3 out of 5. Those things really worked together well to help elevate this film for me, and I came away from it with a lot of satisfaction, and that made me really happy because I'm still a bit salty about those other 3 films. So yeah, this was just something that I enjoyed enough to talk about it with you guys. I hope you get a chance to watch this. It's not necessarily something that you really need to see on the big screen, though I feel like watching it on the big screen gives you the advantage of really noticing that film quality look to it. So if you can check it out, I recommend checking it out, obviously, especially, on the big screen if you want that experience. But if you can't see it until streaming, I think it will be just as enjoyable. It's not a very long film. It does not overstay its welcome. It's only about an hour and 35 minutes. Obviously, credits shave off a little bit. So, you could stop watching the film about an hour and 30 in. The final shot, I really liked how that was done. It just is shown from the perspective of the driver of a vehicle, with the camera looking at a character and watching them go through this thing that's happening to them. And I thought that was so well acted. You will know what I'm talking about when you see it. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about Strange Darling. If you get a chance to watch it, drop a line down below and let me know what you think. If you appreciated it as much as I did, or if you had more issues than just the few that I did. That's it for this one, you guys. Hasta luego.